I am a registered nurse working in the emergency department. I did. After graduating from St. John's, I received a Bachelor in Science from Johns Hopkins University. Yes, absolutely. I think when people ask me that question, the first thing that always comes to mind is interdisciplinary communication. The fact that working in healthcare, especially in the emergency room, you have to be able to communicate with all different minds and specialties and personalities, and that's something that you have to get good at really early on at the program at St. John's. I think also the emergency room is the most St. John's-y place in the hospital or in healthcare, in my personal opinion, because you can't just be good at one thing. You can't just be a cardiac person or a respiratory person. You have to be a little bit good at all kinds of things, and also know what you're not good at, so you can rely on your coworkers, on your teammates to help you out. And that's something we got really used to at St. John's. I think also there's a certain fearlessness that I learned at St. John's, or I developed at St. John's. You have to be ready for whatever the program's going to throw at you. And the emergency room throws a lot of things at you, so you have to be ready for all of that. And I think I learned that fearlessness, that open-mindedness, that bravery at St. John's. No, that's why I went to St. John's. I think by my junior year, I figured out that I wanted to do something in healthcare. And by senior year, I took a EMT class at the local community college. And at that point, I was pretty much hooked on emergency medicine. So I didn't know going in, but I knew I didn't know going in. You mean the question everybody asks? I say you can do anything. I'm a nurse, my husband's a lawyer, we have friends that are teachers and academics and artists. I think St. John's teaches you that if you can do, non-Euclidean geometry or dissect a cat or ancient Greek or whatever was really hard for you, if you can do that thing at St. John's, you can do whatever you want when you leave.
My name's Aaron McLean. I'm a Marine officer, a captain in the Marine Corps. I'm an infantry officer by virtue of my training in the Marine Corps, and I worked as that for 3 years, but now I teach at the Naval Academy, teaching in the English department. I did. I got a Marshall Scholarship and went overseas to Oxford University. I studied there for a couple of years and earned a master's degree in medieval Arabic thought. From there, worked as a journalist for 1 year. I was based in the Middle East for that. I lived in Cairo, wrote for different magazines back in the United States. And from that, I joined the Marine Corps in 2007, went through Officer Candidate School, and have been in the Marine Corps since. Absolutely, absolutely. I think on at least two fronts. The two which spring immediately to mind are, first, that there's no way, I think, to be an effective military officer without the ability to analyze complex phenomena and to communicate the results of your analysis clearly. Whether that complex phenomenon is a text or a technical manual or something you encounter in training, or whether it's literally the battlefield, right? And you're out there and you have to figure out what's going on, who is trying to do what to whom, and what you're going to do. You need to orient to the situation, figure out what's going on, develop your plan, and communicate that. And I'm sort of, as I say that, using sort of military terminology to describe it, but in fact I'm describing a process which involves, I think, all of the liberal arts. As the officer, ultimately it's on your shoulders, the decision that you make. So certainly the sort of skills that we sharpen at St. John's in terms of analysis, communication, reading, writing, speaking are critical. In addition to that, I'd say that, especially having served in a time of war, my career has involved things like courage and cowardice, and victory and defeat, and life and death, and dealing with difficult situations. And I think that the books themselves at St. John's prepare you and give you a depth and give you a preparation for experiencing the world that I don't think you're likely to get to the same extent at a more conventional college. Not a clue. Not a clue. I think I had. I come from a military family. My father was in the Army for many years. Half brother went to Virginia Military Institute. So the military was in the atmosphere. But I think that when I showed up at St. John's, I had no real concrete notion that this is what I wanted to pursue. And indeed, I didn't pursue it when I graduated. I went to grad school and worked in another field for a little while before deciding what I wanted to be when I grew up and joining the Marine Corps. Anything you want. I've done a few things myself. I may do a few things more, actually. But I'm not aware of any limitations on what you're going to do. Your imagination is sort of the limiting factor on that.
Hi, my name is Tia Pazik. I'm a graduate of the St. John's College Annapolis campus, class of 1986. I am currently Vice President of Operations for World Learning's International Development and Exchange Program Division. World Learning is an academic and international development organization. We run a master's degree program for international development, study abroad programs in about 60 countries, and we conduct international development and exchanges programs. Right after St. John's, I went to Harvard Law School and graduated from Harvard in '89. Well, I started practicing law here in DC, and there's so much going on in DC that is legally related but not necessarily practicing law, so it was easy to transition from practicing law to international development. I also parlayed my ethnic background, which is Croatian and Romanian, to start participating in some of the changes that were going on in Eastern Europe at the time in the early 90s. Well, I felt for sure that by now that I would be a partner at a law firm. As with many of my plans, it didn't go quite according to what I thought it would, happily so. And I think that probably part of what St. John's helps me with is essentially being fearless to try new things. You know, part of the program involves or requires us to engage in topics and study things that we might not have chosen had we gone to a school that had an elective curriculum. And so the notion of being plunged into a topic and learning about it and coming out with perhaps not expertise, but enough understanding to be able to discuss with your colleagues tends to embody one with a certain level of fearlessness that one can pretty much do anything as long as you start really thinking about it. Most definitely. I mean, my job with operations takes me across a complexity of areas. I handle the legal and compliance work for the organization, performance management, meaning the monitoring and evaluation aspects of the work, strategic planning, and facilities management. So they're fairly disparate areas, and I think that the very disparate areas that we studied in St. John's enabled me to manage well all of those things. And I think as well the critical thinking that we need to bring to the learning process at St. John's is another big part of what I do and helps me do my job. Anything. Honestly, anything. I'm in international development. I've got friends who are librarians, friends who are attorneys, friends who have MBAs and they're engaged in business. So really anything that you put your mind to, you can do.
My name is John Fleming. I teach mathematics in Montgomery County, Maryland Public Schools. I teach in the Up-County Center for Gifted Students. It's a competitive entry program for highly gifted students, and I'm teaching geometry and algebra. Twice. Once upon a time I went to Montgomery College so that I could leave the field of construction and move into construction management. So I went to Montgomery College and learned construction management skills. And then when I set my heart on teaching, I went to University of Maryland to get a master's degree and a teaching certificate. No, that was a far move that came way later in life, 20 years later in life, when I experimented with my children as a teacher adjunct in the classroom. I discovered how much I liked it, and then I pursued it from there. But I didn't know when I was at St. John's, no. Sure, I would say that I'm a better teacher because of my St. John's background. A of all, I think that the environment there where the students are treated with respect and the students have a voice that's listened to by the tutor is something that carries over into my teaching. I try and treat my students with respect. I try and listen to them carefully and discuss with them their needs, their questions, how I can best help them, rather than dictating from the front of the room that this is the way it's going to be. It's much more open in my classroom as to which direction we want to go, what exactly can we pursue, within limits, of course, but I think that open-endedness came in part from my St. John's experience. If someone were to ask me that, I would say that St. John's has an enormous value to a young person who's not already goal-oriented. I'm not sure I want to be a doctor. I'm not sure I want to be a teacher or a lawyer or something, or a politician like some of my friends did. But the St. John's experience is so vast with the science and the language and the philosophy and the literature that it seems to me the graduate from St. John's is an educated man and has begun to learn how to think. And that experience is invaluable because once you have that under your belt, you can do anything. You want to pursue medicine, you certainly know how to learn. You know how to read, you know how to write, you can do the math and the science. If you want to pursue some other field, the same applies. You can take that St. John's background and teach yourself anything because you're such a good reader.
I'm Sharon Bishop, graduated in 1966, and I'm recently retired from a career in government consulting. I went to Bryn Mawr and got a master's degree in 1972 and went to work for Booz Allen in Hamilton in Washington doing government contracts in the social services arena. In 1983, I worked with a guy and we started our own business and grew that business to $35 million in revenue and 350 employees. In 2005, we sold the business to a company called ICF International, and I've been working with them ever since, but now I think I'm hanging up my shingle and hopefully taking it easier. In the sense that it helped you understand that you can tackle almost anything. After the St. John's program, graduate school was frankly a piece of cake, you know, and it went very well. But St. John's gives you deal with such important issues at St. John's, and you do it directly. You don't do it through an intermediary. So when you get out in the world, you really do have the idea that you can really do whatever you want to do. My answer, really, without being flip, is you can do anything you want to do. And the evidence is clear because look at the diversity of our graduates. You know, we have people who become doctors, lawyers, business people, theater people, playwrights, movie producers. I mean, we're totally diverse. I think that St. John's is excellent preparation for graduate school, and it's actually excellent preparation for life. So, you know, I think the evidence is look at our Wall Street financiers, for example. Well, I'm going to be reading more books because when you're working all the time, your reading sometimes suffers.
think I'm going to be reading more books and watching more movies and taking more walks. Eva Braun is one of my examples of what to do in retirement.